Hello, welcome to another Modest Musings. My name is Fear Dragon, and today's topic is going to be about rivalries in StarCraft. Now, people always think of the big rivalries in StarCraft. People always consider Hawk versus Idra, I think, is always the first one that gets blurted out. Team Liquid versus Evil Geniuses, Sue versus Second Place. Like, you have a lot of these rivalries that exist, but I think lately, I would say in the past 2 or so years, rivalries have been a bit downplayed, or not even downplayed. We haven't been building them up as much. And the sad thing is that they are still there. Maybe they're a little bit less banter involved than Huck versus Idra, but you have to remember, Huck versus Idra, yes, there was the whole hallucination thing, but that rivalry kind of existed, I would say, before those two players kind of went at it verbally. Those two players both represented the premier players, the premier foreigners on their respective teams that had already kind of built up this rivalry against each other. The Team Liquid versus Evil Geniuses rivalry was really big. Huck, being a former or being on Team Liquid at the time, was representing, Team Liquid as a whole. Idra was representing Evil Geniuses as a whole. And it was that combative nature in the games that they played and what they kind of represented that really, I think, initially started that rivalry. And from there, it got built. Once the rivalry was established, that's when the players' banter and everything starts getting involved and it builds it up even more. But it's important to recognize that there was that starting base that existed beforehand. I think another one that also comes to mind, another TL versus EG, was Liquid Hero versus EG's Puma. That was a huge thing. And I think that these days, we have the potential for these rivalries that don't really get talked about as much. One of the examples that I always like to talk about is Pili Pili versus Jon Snow. It's my favorite North American rivalry that exists in today's day and age, because those two guys would just constantly hit each other. Every single qualifier, all the time, they would hit each other. They would play an absurd amount, almost just through sheer luck, and it was just so back and forth. They would constantly be at this like 50-50 win rate in both series and games and everything. Until they made them play a best of 69 against each other, and Jon Snow kind of took the lead on games because, let's be real, I got them to play on 4v4 maps. So overload drops pretty good. But I think that there is this kind of missing link, and I feel as though it really does take away from the potential of stories being built up in the StarCraft scene. We've had a few instances of good stories or good rivalries starting to kind of surface. But nothing like we used to really have with MVP versus Nesty, and there's Don Regu versus, I think it was MKP. There's also Don Regu versus somebody else. My mind's blanking right now, but there were these really cool, intricate stories that you would see. And I suppose there's still some, like Scarlet versus Neve, I would say, is kind of like this weird rivalry, because Scarlet, I know she said before that she sees a lot of herself in Neve, who's this kind of really strong foreign hope, kind of coming out of nowhere. A lot of people look to him. He's got a huge fan base, but he's also a little bit socially awkward, is a little bit mean way to put it, but definitely a little bit quieter, more reserved. But I think he's kind of growing into himself a little bit more these days, and that's really what Scarlet, I think, went through. She was the more reserved person. Now she's actually a very, very she's still a little bit shy. It's not always going to be super duper hyperactive or anything, or super out there, but she's definitely grown into herself a little bit more, and I guess become that more vocal, outgoing person. And I think that Neve is sort of going through that as well. So it's like that kind of weird thing where it's almost a mentor-mentee relationship in a lot of ways, especially since they were living in the same team house and everything for such a long time. But yeah, I think that there's still a lot of potential for it. And the thing is, you don't really notice these rivalries unless you go ask these players, who sometimes know about them and sometimes the players aren't even that aware of them. They have a general sense. Most players have a general sense of, oh yeah, I go pretty even with such and such person, or oh man, yeah, that person's like knocked me out of a bunch of events. But if you just ask them, hey, who are your rivals? A lot of the time they won't think of them. But I want to emphasize the point that a lot of the times these rivalries are not built up through or started through the player being aware of it or anything. It's usually a commentator, a fan, someone in the community realizing that this is the case and then bringing it to light. And as it happens more and more with a particular set of players, that is what really instigates, I feel, the rivalries, the big rivalries that we've seen. Of course, that involves a bit of natural cause. You can't just be like, okay, well, innovation and, I don't know, Avilo, like, they're rivals right now. Look at all the times that they've like faced each other this one time. I mean, obviously they have to face each other. They have to actually have some degree of, I guess, rivalry, whether it be going very even against each other, whether it's completely one-sided, super lopsided. I think this is something that I realized because during ladder hero, or just not ladder heroes, but like tournaments that I would cast, I have a script that pulls up the Aligulac history between two players immediately, so I can do it very dynamically. I do it very often, and all the times I see these players that have literally never won a competitive series versus the other one. And sometimes it's not just across like 3-4 series. It's, they've played 10-15 series against each other, and one of them has literally never beaten the other, and they're both still very good players. So those kinds of opportunities, I think they exist, but we just aren't really finding them and shedding the light on them. And I think that's a little bit of obviously the role of the commentators to kind of dig those up, surface them, continue to build those stories alongside them. But also, of course, the community, I think, has that huge potential. If you're something you would be interested in doing, that's something that's completely feasible. I think there's a lot of value in actually doing that. Even just making the Reddit threads or anything, talking about those rivalries. You have the writers, the reporters and everything who like to talk about this kind of stuff. I think this is where a lot of the content that is missing in StarCraft could be generated from. Looking into a lot of this stuff, talking about the story of how two players have met and how their relationship versus each other has kind of changed. And I think from there, things just get built a bit more naturally. After that, it's in the consciousness of the community or even the players themselves sometimes. That's when things start developing and you start getting these lasting stories of these lasting rivalries between two players. But yeah, that's going to be it. Hopefully you guys enjoy that little talk, and I hope that you guys maybe even consider investing a little bit of time and looking into this yourself. And even if it's just spamming Twitch chat with your hype for, I don't know, such and such rivalry, or you go ahead and Twitch chat and say, oh yeah, I can't believe that such and such player has never beaten such and such other player. Popping in those little facts, adding a little bit of color and characterization to the stories will go a long way, not only for yourself, but I think for a lot of other people in the community. So hopefully you guys do consider that. But yeah, thank you all so much for tuning in. In terms of announcements, I have 2 announcements that I can't talk about yet. They're not my things to announce. But it's going to be exciting. Keep an eye out for them. And I'll be retweeting them and all that good stuff on my Twitter. But yeah, thank you all so much for tuning in. And I hope to see you guys soon. I don't think that there's anything going on this weekend for me. And I think next weekend is, pretty sure it's Valencia. Yeah. So probably won't be doing anything that weekend either. Won't be like running any of my own events against Valencia. That seems like suicide. But yeah, thank you all so much and have a wonderful, wonderful day. Keep StarCrafting, guys.